Welcome to Ukraine War Chronicles, a journalistic look at the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe. I'm Michael Thompson, international affairs correspondent, bringing you the latest updates and analysis on the war that has reshaped European security and affected millions of lives worldwide.
And I'm Anna Kowalski, humanitarian affairs reporter. Today's podcast will cover recent military developments on the battlefield and the continuing humanitarian crisis affecting Ukrainian civilians. As we enter the fourth year of this conflict, the situation remains both dynamic and deeply troubling.
Indeed, Anna. Let's begin with the latest military developments. According to recent reports, the conflict has intensified dramatically in September 2025, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stating that Russia has launched more than 3,500 drones and nearly 190 missiles against Ukraine this month alone. He's described this as an aerial terror operation.
That's a staggering number, Michael. And unfortunately, we're seeing the devastating impact of these attacks on civilians. The UNHRC monitoring mission reported that June 2025 saw the highest monthly civilian casualties in 3 years, 232 people killed and 1,343 injured. This trend has continued into July and August.
The Russian strategy seems to focus on overwhelming Ukrainian air defenses through mass drone attacks. Just this week, Russian forces deployed nearly 400 Shahed loitering munitions and 18 high-powered missiles in a single overnight strike on Kyiv. These attacks are no longer limited to frontline areas, but are striking deep into Ukrainian territory.
Why is Russia gaining ground now, Michael? Wasn't Ukraine making progress with its counteroffensive earlier this year?
Several factors are at play. First, Russia's strategy of encircling Ukrainian defensive positions in the eastern oblasts appears to be working. Ukrainian units are undermanned and have been forced to abandon key positions, including the strategic town of Chasiv Yar. Additionally, Russia has been concentrating forces in the Pokrovsk area, a critical transportation hub.
I understand that Russia and Belarus recently conducted military exercises as well, correct?
Correct. The Zapad 2025 exercises concluded in mid-September, overseen personally by President Putin. These drills included rehearsals for the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons, which has raised international concerns. Perhaps most notably, soldiers from countries including India, Iran, Bangladesh, and several African nations participated, showing Russia's continued international military relationships despite Western isolation efforts.
Let's shift our focus to the humanitarian situation. According to the latest UNHCR data, approximately 12.7 million people in Ukraine will need humanitarian assistance in 2025. That's more than a quarter of Ukraine's pre-war population.
And the displacement figures remain staggering. Current estimates show about 3.7 million internally displaced people within Ukraine, while another 6.9 million Ukrainians have fled the country as refugees. That means nearly a quarter of Ukraine's pre-war population has been displaced.
The situation near the front lines is particularly dire. Recent reports indicate that approximately 1.1 million people require evacuation from frontline areas in eastern Ukraine. In the Donetsk region alone, about 218,000 people need evacuation, including 16,500 children.
What options do these civilians have?
That's what makes the situation so heartbreaking, Michael. Many face an impossible choice. Take the town of Bilosirske in eastern Ukraine. Its pre-war population was about 16,000, but now only around 700 people remain. Some simply can't leave due to mobility issues, lack of resources, or having nowhere to go. Others refuse to abandon their homes despite the danger.
And the Ukrainian government can't rehouse everyone, even if they do evacuate, correct?
Exactly. Authorities will help evacuate those in immediate danger, but finding safe, sustainable housing for millions of displaced people is beyond their capacity. I recently spoke with Elena, a 67-year-old woman who fled Pokrovsk last month. She told me, "I lived in my home for 40 years. Now I sleep on a cot in a school gymnasium and don't know if I'll ever return. Her story is sadly common.
Let's discuss the infrastructure damage as well. Reports indicate that Ukraine's power generation capacity has been devastated, falling from 56 gigawatts before the war to just 9 gigawatts by the end of 2024. Overall, about 64% of Ukraine's electricity generating capacity has been destroyed or is in occupied territories.
This has enormous implications for civilians, especially with winter approaching. Humanitarian organizations are launching their 2025-2026 winter response plan to provide insulation materials, heaters, fuel, blankets, and warm clothing. But the scale of need is overwhelming.
The economic impact has been severe as well. Ukraine's economy contracted by 22.6% between 2022 and 2024. And while there's a forecast of 2% growth for 2025, that's minimal compared to the devastation. The country's budget deficit stands at over 20% of GDP, excluding foreign grants.
And we're seeing changes in international aid patterns. The European Commission has proposed speeding up the phase-out of Russian fossil fuel imports. Meanwhile, the closure of USAID in July 2025 has dramatically reduced America's foreign aid capacity, with funding dropping from an average of $51.4 billion annually to just $13 billion.
However, there are signs of continued military support. The Trump administration has reportedly approved its first military aid packages for Ukraine under a new financial agreement with allies. These packages, worth up to $500 million each, could be shipped soon.
While aid continues, the human toll rises daily. The UNHRC monitoring mission reports that since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, they've documented at least 13,580 civilian deaths, including 716 children, and 34,135 civilians injured, including over 2,000 children.
And those are just the verified cases. The actual numbers are likely much higher, especially in occupied territories where international monitors don't have access.
Michael, I'd like to highlight the psychological impact as well. A UN representative recently noted that, quote, children spend many nights not tucked in bed, but sheltering in corridors, basements, and bathrooms, covering their ears from the sounds of sirens and explosions. These experiences bring lasting scars.
That's an important point, Anna. The war's impact goes beyond physical destruction and displacement. The mental health crisis is profound, and its effects will last for generations.
One particularly concerning trend is the targeting of energy infrastructure. As winter approaches, there are fears of a humanitarian catastrophe if heating systems can't function. The Ukrainian government is working to decentralize the energy grid, creating smaller local power generation units that are less vulnerable to attacks.
Let's also discuss the diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict. In early August, there were reportedly high-level talks between Russian President Putin and a U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff. While no public deal emerged, former President Trump described the talks as making great progress toward a ceasefire.
Yet the fighting continues with no clear end in sight. Recent polling suggests that 63% of Russians and 51% of Ukrainians support peace negotiations, with 56% of Ukrainians indicating they would accept a compromise to end the war. However, the terms of such a compromise remain contentious.
Russia appears to be treating this as a long-term conflict. Former President Medvedev has described Russia's draft 2026 budget as a wartime budget, with combined defense and national security spending estimated at $204 billion in 2025, the highest since the Cold War.
Meanwhile, ordinary Ukrainians continue to suffer. The UN reports that in areas beyond the Ukrainian government's control, around 1 million people endure dire humanitarian conditions. Yet access for aid organizations remains severely restricted.
As we wrap up today's episode, what message do humanitarian organizations want to convey to our listeners?
The message I consistently hear is that the need for humanitarian aid does not end when headlines fade. Solidarity has no expiration date. Despite the war entering its fourth year, the needs remain acute and in many ways are increasing. Humanitarian organizations need sustained funding and access to help those affected.
And what can our listeners do to help?
There are many reputable organizations providing direct assistance, from emergency medical care to food, shelter, and psychological support. Even small donations can make a difference. Additionally, supporting Ukrainian refugees in your local community and keeping pressure on political leaders to seek diplomatic solutions are important actions.
Thank you, Anna, for that important perspective. To our listeners, we'll continue to bring you updates on this conflict as the situation evolves. The war in Ukraine may have faded somewhat from daily headlines, but its impact remains profound, both for Ukrainians and for global security.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of Ukraine War Chronicles. We'll be back next week with more in-depth coverage of this ongoing crisis. Until then, this is Anna Kowalski
And Michael Thompson, signing off.